views. Thank you. Teaching primary source research to undergraduate history majors. Um, just a little introduction on who we all are. So again, my name is Imani Spence. I'm the Student Success Librarian. I'm joined by Julie Grob, who is Coordinator for Instruction in the Special Collections, and then a team of teaching and learning librarians, including Edward Gloor, Natalia Kapacinskas, Erica Lopez, and then our head of teaching and learning, Veronica Arellano Douglas. We all have worked together here to present this project that we're talking about today. So we'll be kind of going back and forth through our presentation. Next slide. I wanted to say thank you to our TPS Fest volunteers. I mentioned them briefly before. We have Julie Husky, who has been a great Zoom helper, making sure that we have our access to share our slides. Heather Smedberg, who is our chat moderator. They have been able to share our links. So if you have any pressing chat moments, Heather will be able to share with us during our discussion in case we lose our ability to watch the chat. And then Liz Bloodworth is our note taker. And again, they are collaborative notes that are shared in the Zoom chat. I know sometimes when you join late, if you'd like us to share those links again, no worries, we're happy to do that. And I also didn't say this before, but since TPS Fest is for each of you, don't feel bad if you have to leave or come. It's always welcome to have you for any amount of time. And with that, we'll talk a little bit about what we're talking about in this session. So as I mentioned before, we're going to start off with a scenario discussion, just kind of getting us in the frame of mind of how we're going to be doing this work and what we'll be discussing as far as like the scenario that we came up with. So that will not be recorded. Then we'll talk a little bit about the collaboration that we have as members of different departments. So as we know, it's with collaboration, there's always things that can be learned. So we'll share a little bit of our lessons learned, and then we will lead into a question and answer portion. Again, if you have any questions during, you can save them for question and answer, but you also could put them in the chat, and our chat moderator and Zoom helpers will be monitoring that. And I'll pass it over to Julie to begin our discussion.
Thanks, Imani. I'm Julie Grob from Special Collections at UH. And I'm going to share with you the scenario for our discussion today. And I think we could probably stop recording at this point. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Natalia.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the discussion. It was really fun to hear everyone's ideas and experiences. So I guess if you haven't already surmised, this situation that we've been discussing is very similar to what we have recently encountered and worked through over the past few years at University of Houston libraries. So we want to give you a timeline for some background of what happened and our experience. So around the fall of 2022, the director of undergraduate studies for the history department reached out to Julie, Veronica, and I, given that we all had different experience working with her in the past, with a request to provide library instruction in a new undergraduate history research methods course that was being developed. So the goal was for students to learn from the library about archival research from a special collections librarian like Julie, as well as about secondary research and information literacy skills from instruction librarians in the teaching and learning department where Veronica and I work. Originally, what the faculty, what the director of undergraduate studies had proposed was that the library would be involved with 4 total class sessions, including a session on library research skills, a library scavenger hunt, and then 2 special collections visits. So we were all very excited for the opportunity to be involved with this important class, but we were also a little surprised to learn that we felt we had been kind of conscripted into these very specific sessions without being consulted about our capacity or inclination to do so. Additionally, Veronica and I felt that there were probably better options for teaching the library research skills portion than the suggested library source scavenger hunt, that the director had suggested. So in the spring of 2023, we decided that we really needed to gather some information because we knew we wanted to respond to the proposed collaboration carefully. We wanted to ensure that we had some agency in what we taught and in how we collaborate with instructors and departments. So before making any commitment or response, we met and decided that we would ask some questions. So the three of us met with the history department's director of undergraduate studies and asked questions about instructors, who would be involved, objectives, timelines, and the content of the course overall. The conversation was very fruitful and it allowed us to start planning among ourselves. We decided that we would propose options for collaborating with the department that would honor their original learning objectives for including library instruction in the course while also honoring our own priorities in teaching and our capacity.
So once we had gathered all the information we thought would best help us in our planning, Julie, Natalia, and I began to develop our instructional approach to this new proposed course. And something I'd really like to emphasize about our work during this time, this was really summer through fall of 2023, is that this was truly a cross-departmental effort. So prior to working on this course, Julie and I met regularly as she is instruction coordinator for special collections, and I'm head of our teaching and learning department. And we'd get together to talk about issues we were seeing popping up in our teaching, programmatic teaching efforts, and really any other topics that we thought would be of interest to one another in the teaching we were doing in our respective departments. And this really provided an opportunity for us to learn more about what and how we teach, where there are some similarities and some differences, and how information literacy and primary source literacy can work together to develop learners' research skills and critical thinking. As Julie and I and Natalia discussed our potential involvement in this new historian's craft course, we started by developing learning outcomes around our respective literacies. And then from those outcomes, we began to plan session offerings and sequences that emphasized information literacy and primary source literacy as interrelated practices and concepts. So we really wanted students to know that primary and secondary source research build on one another as part of an iterative exploratory research process, and that you move between the two at various points throughout the research process in history. So together we developed a 4-class sequence that was split evenly between special collections and the teaching and learning department. And we were able to present at the history department's fall retreat before the start of the semester. It was a chance for all of the faculty to gather and plan for the year. So we created a document to share, and it detailed our collaborative approach to learning between faculty and librarians. So really kind of setting our expectations for collaboration on the outset. It explained each of the 4 instruction sessions, which my colleagues will do in more detail in just a moment. And it shared additional instructional resources that might benefit students and instructors of the course. And these included things like our history and primary source materials research guides, various online lessons that we created using Articulate Rise 360, and then a few in-house created videos on various information literacy and archival or special collections topics. So we had the strong support, again, of the program director for undergraduate studies, who really reinforced the importance of these library workshops to their colleagues at this retreat. And now I will hand things over to Julie.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. So this is the roadmap for the 4 sessions that we led. The first was about focused on what are archives and what does an archivist do. The second was document analysis. The third was developing questions from analysis. And the fourth was connecting primary and secondary sources. Okay, and we thought it was important that the first sessions were in special collections with physical materials before leading into other sessions. So the first session takes place in special collections. Students sit at tables in groups of 3 or 4, and each group gets a large sheet of paper with a question written on top. Students list their ideas in response to the question, what are archives, or what does an archivist do? And then they swap sheets with another group who had the other question. When they're done with their lists, I lead a class discussion around their responses. And this activity gives students the opportunity to share what they know about archives or archivists without feeling called out. And it allows me to fill in details and concepts and give gentle redirection in a conversational way. This big paper activity, of course, comes from a TPS Fest 2023 presentation. This was by Megan Atkinson of Tennessee Tech University, based on work by Kate Hutchins at University of Michigan. Okay, for the second session, students take several cracks at document analysis. The first time as a whole class analyzing a document on the screen. So for this activity, I start by asking questions about the projected item, which you see here, a hip hop flyer advertising a regional event. I also show the physical item so that they can see the size. Standard questions about the place and time of creation, the perspective of the creator, and the intended audience follow. To close, they brainstorm questions that the document raises for them about the people or culture involved in the event. And this document analysis activity is based on the Archival Vibe Check presentation from Molly Brown of Northeastern University, which was at TPS Fest in 2022. Next, they work on a physical hip hop item in small groups of 3 or 4. The items include a Jay-Z album and an order for mixtapes. The worksheet invites them to think about how their own personal experiences or observations might help them understand the object. The small groups also generate questions inspired by the object. And I'll hand it over to Imani.
Hi. So then the students come for 2 sessions in the teaching and learning department. So that means they're still in the library, but they're just in a different portion of the library, which I like to consider this to be a bit of a bridge between primary source analysis and secondary source searching. So when they take this analysis, what they've learned from the primary source material, they want to use that to find their secondary sources. So this requires some typical information literacy skills, like creating keywords and lines of inquiry to bring to academic databases. And the responses that they provided to Julie in special collections and all of the work that they did with the worksheets will come to us as well. Usually that is just in a direct handoff. And sometimes Julie is able to scan those handouts for us, and sometimes we look back on them. And we bring back those item-based questions and their responses so that we can kind of show them how to develop those deeper lines of inquiry. And again, those help us understand how we can use that into our academic databases. Next slide, please. So we're back with the lovely flyer that Julie presented to you all just a moment ago. And what we like to think about for this session is like, what more would our students like to know about this item? So flyers we think are great because they contain a lot of factual information. So we can show them who, what, when, where, and why with factual questions. But then there are also other questions to bring out the full context of an item within the archives. And we like to call these more open-ended questions. In the past, we've actually had a class come who was focusing specifically on a historic figure who did abolition work. So we were able to use Juneteenth as I think of as a wedge to kind of talk about the ways that you can bring open-ended and context into this assignment. So we thought about, who and what is happening. As you can see here, this is a Juneteenth rap explosion. And then we thought about how has Juneteenth been commemorated in Texas. So as some and maybe most of you know, Juneteenth was commemorated first in Texas as it was the proclamation in Galveston that alerted slaves of their emancipation. So we able to contrast that with questions like who is the screwed up clique, which is a more factual question, and that is more direct. So one thing that we talked about with Julie in the second session is how students are able to bring their prior knowledge and their more personal knowledge into their historic research. So that comes up again as we having students continue to ask questions about why, sometimes we even ask why this flyer is this size, why was it a flyer as opposed to an Instagram post? So asking those types of questions can help students develop deeper lines of inquiry, and then again, use that into our more information literacy academic database skills. And I'll pass it over to Erica.
It's me actually, but thanks, Imani.
My bad.
No worries. So in our final session, we talked to students about the connections between primary sources and secondary sources and how each of those are used in historical scholarship. This includes discussions on why historians might go to the archives and then creation of secondary sources. And we expand from there into scholarly sources and how to find them through our library so that we can set the students up to complete the activity for the session, which is an activity on citation tracing. So in this activity, students read through sections of a research paper. They're all reading the same paper, but different portions of it. And then they identify a citation in the text and then do a few things with that citation. They determine whether it is a primary or secondary source, what type of source is it? So is it a book? Is it a newspaper article? And then they try to locate that source using our library database. So a major point of this session is that students walk away with a better understanding of how a historical scholar might engage with the primary source to produce a research product. This activity also highlights the importance of archives and that it exposes students to the fact that some of the sources they encounter in their research only exist physically and through the preservation work of archivists. The course itself is meant to set students up on the path of becoming a history researcher. And so through this citation tracing activity, the students come to find multiple primary sources throughout the article, and hopefully they start to identify how these are being used to support the creation of the secondary source. And we try to emphasize to students that as a general public, we come to understand history through engaging with secondary and tertiary sources more often than we do with primary sources. And so we hope that by the end of the session, we've been able to model part of the process of creating those secondary sources to the students.
Thank you, Edward. I'm Erica Lopez, and I'm going to talk about how this has all gone. So lots of things have gone well. Coming together as a group after each semester to debrief about how things went allows us to make sure we're on the same page, and it helps us to talk through the need for any changes or updates. Meeting with students multiple times over the 4-session course gives us all time to really develop ideas about the materials and about the research. We don't feel rushed teaching, so we get to cover everything that we want to, and we're able to really build a rapport with the students over those 4 sessions. And the students in the class are always really engaged with the materials and with the learning activities. They give us that wonderful back and forth that we like to experience in class sessions. And then, of course, co-teaching among the teaching and learning librarians has been really helpful. Some of us are still developing our primary source literacy and our confidence in teaching these concepts. We also observe each other's sessions so we can learn from each other and get better acquainted with the material before it's our turn to teach a session. And the teaching and learning department is always looking for opportunities to collaborate with other teaching departments. And this has been the most sustained and successful effort between teaching and learning and special collections. And feedback from faculty has been positive. They communicate that they enjoy the sessions and they keep on coming back. So some of our challenges. First, the hip hop materials we use might be a little obscure for students to grasp the context of, especially on short notice. It was hard for students who didn't have familiarity with hip hop or with the 1990s to understand what they were looking at. And in addition to trying to figure out the context of those materials, they're also learning brand new concepts about the archives and about research. We also struggled a little bit with teaching I feel like they were yesterday too. We've also struggled teaching the idea of factual versus open-ended questions. Imani talked about that earlier. Students seem to have a hard time with that. We're not sure if we need to use different vocabulary or if we need to try a different learning activity, but we are definitely interested in revising how we present it. I mentioned previously that teaching and learning librarians co-teach, and one of the unfortunate things for special collections is there is but one Julie. She's the instruction coordinator in her department and sort of the primary go-to person. So while teaching and learning librarians kind of get to split up the sections of historian's craft, Julie typically does all of them. And then another challenge is that sometimes students see us pretty early in the semester relative to when they're really going to get into their research projects. So when they come to see us, they might not quite yet understand the relevance to them and to what they're going to be doing in the future. We want to make it clearer to students that we're trying to model the research process and the practices that they need to engage in for their own topics later down the road. And speaking of relevance, each faculty member teaching this course has a different focus area or theme. So while it would be awesome to pull materials related to their specific research interests, it's a bit harder to try to tailor our instruction to one period of time or to specific events in history for each and every section. And creating something different for each and every section would be kind of a lot. And then finally, we've also learned a lot. So I personally have a much better appreciation for archival research, especially archival notes and research papers, which I never paid much attention to or maybe really even noticed prior to becoming involved with this class and with observing Julie teach. I also learned how vital community support and engagement is to a quality collection, and I have a much better appreciation of that now. Special collections and teaching and learning also learned a lot about each other through observation of each other's sessions, by asking questions, and by working together to give these students the best possible instruction. And it's truly been a collaborative process that we continue to enjoy.
Thank you so much for being here, for engaging with our discussion earlier, and hearing about our project and how it's gone. We would love to take questions now, so do please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand with the raise hand function. And